a fan club you've got here. Man. I have a feeling a few of you might know her. Stephanie, it's great to be here with you this evening, and what a great turnout. So first I have to ask you what it's like for a writing coach and an editor to turn around and have her first book as a writer.
Yeah. In the publishing industry, we talk a lot about vulnerability hangovers. So now I am not immune to that from the author side of things. But I think it's, going through, I've edited probably hundreds of manuscripts and worked with hundreds of authors developing their books, but I've never done what I've asked and tasked them to do. So now this book is making me honest. And it's very empathy-inducing in a good way that hopefully makes me a better editor to share in the highs and the lows of the creative journey, because they're the same whether you're a first-timer or you've done this rodeo a lot of times. So I think it's hopefully making me better at what I do.
Why do you call this a risk story?
So the heart of the book was written out of this idea that the more you love, the more is on the line. And that's true whether, in many different contexts. For me, it was the journey of pregnancy and pregnancy loss and the choice to sort of try again. But I think in any context, trying for love, and connection, presence, connection, and belonging, all those things that ultimately matter most in life, can really only be accessed on the other side of taking a risk. So whether that's trying again after you've been really hurt, trying a new relationship, whether it's, going for a new friendship after you've been burned, or stepping into a new community or a faith community after some harrowing experiences, all of that is a risk. But ultimately, if you choose not to take some of those risks, and there's a discernment process, but I think the choice to play it safe can often be, it's self-preservation, but it can also be the choice to live a small life. And I don't think that that's ultimately what we want. So it's a taking your chances, taking risks kind of message that hopefully we can all relate to from different angles.
How did you come up with the title?
This book has had multiple different titles, multiple lives, and I'm happy with where it landed, because I think the title, even after everything, to me, implies a before and after, and a choice after the after. And then the subtitle is The Spiritual Practice of Knowing the Risks and Loving Anyway. And to me, this is a practice. It's not something you master. It's not something you accomplish once and for all. It's just the ongoing practice of choosing to try for something that's good and true and beautiful, even though you don't know where that story's going to end. So hopefully there's an invitation there for all of us.
So when you started writing this book, did you know it would end up this way?
Which way?
A spiritual book with a religious overtone, is that fair?
Yeah, sure. So I write about this in the beginning of the book. There was a moment when I knew it was a book, and it was when I'm a spatial learner, so I was writing. I've always been a writer for just a personal writer for personal processing. But as every editor hopefully knows, there's a world of difference between personal processing and public offering. So it's never a given that any personal writing will become published, or at least I don't believe it should be. So I was really writing for myself personally. And then but the moment that I realized, I think that there's a book here, is when I took a pile of sticky notes, and I made rows on the carpet. And one was the row of personal timeline, here's what happened, when it happened. And then the second row was the rhythms of the sacred year, the Christian year, liturgical year, however you express that. And to me, those rhythms, I think of them as, at their kind of essence, it's the cycle of life, death, and resurrection or rebirth, which I think is familiar to us all, whether or not those are traditions that are of interest or, of personal connection to you. But I think we all know what it's like to face life and death and rebirth. So when I stacked those timelines on top of each other, I found that they were juxtaposing in ways that were both sometimes deeply meaningful and then at turns deeply painful. So for us, if you've read the book, our first pregnancy ended in loss right the week before Christmas. So it was this incredible season of wonder, and then kind of the whiplash end of that, right as the world was readying to celebrate the most, this very historic birth, and how painful that was. And then in that circle of that year, from that December to December, a year almost to the day, our daughter was born. So kind of holding in tension, how do you hold, so much sorrow with so much joy and expectation, and so much anxiety between knowing the worst that can happen and hoping for the best. Which, so I think, coming back to your question, I realized that for me, as someone who the liturgical kind of rhythms is meaningful to me personally, I really came to interpret that story as a story of risk, risking in the name of love. And how do you find anchors and ground yourself to sustain the unknowing of how that story is going to go? So that connected with my personal experience, and I
had never heard that connection before. Mm-hmm. It literally just came to you one day? Or have other people written about this?
I think it was an outworking. I don't think that take is entirely original to me, mm-hmm. but I think it was an outworking, and especially the theme of risk. That took time to sort of make the constellation, but it did seem apparent to me when I mapped it out in the way that I did.
Before we get into that period that you just talked about a little bit, let's go earlier, during that period of your life when you had no intention nor interest of having children. You said it was beneath you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for pulling out the most unflattering self-description in the book.
Well, it's so honest. It is so honest.
Yeah. Early in the book, I write about, so Zach and I were married for a decade nearly, before we even really broached the serious decision making. And speaking of vulnerability hangovers, here I am just talking about my reproductive life in a book for perpetuity in print. But it was kind of our status for really almost that decade was, someday, and then it just never materialized into any kind of want. And we both have very specific, as people who know us know, we both have specific fields that we work in, which requires, we filled that 10 years with a lot of grad school, a lot of moves, a lot of job opportunities. And life was good, and we didn't feel like we were missing anything. And, I detail in the book kind of the threshold moments for me that helped crack open my perspective. And, kids are not for everyone. This is not meant to be a prescriptive universality for anyone. But for me and for us, I think I was moved by the decision. I was moved by the paradigm shift for me of maybe the meaningful life is not so much ascension, like a solo act of I'm gonna rise and, do all the things I want to do and get the, whether career-wise or otherwise. But maybe it's more expansion, and a meaningful life is more kind of hand-to-hand reaching out in the circle of people that we hold dear, whatever form those relationships and connections end up taking. So I was challenged by that. And that was a big part of our process, ultimately.
I was afraid that parenthood would make less of me.
Yeah. And with two littles at home, I can say my time has never looked more different. I think what's clarified for me is I've always been an introvert. I've always been a little bit of an aggressive individualist, and I don't say that with any sense of pride. But so it was really hard. It felt like giving up so much autonomy that I didn't want to give up. And that was really challenging. And I still maintain that children are the greatest disruption to ever grace my life. And I do mean every single word of that sentence in equal weight.
This reflects back on what you said earlier, but if I can read this one paragraph and get you to talk about it. We chance the chaos of our joy every time we dare to reach out against the fear of rejection, vulnerability, or loss. We chance it all every time we let ourselves get too attached, say, I love you first, go scared, keep our heart open after it's been broken. Every decision to stay in the hard conversation with someone we love, ask that maybe new friend for their number, show up at that support group, stay for that awkward coffee hour, or ask for help is a gamble on a gift of human connection against the risks of getting hurt. How did you develop that? How did you come to that paragraph personally?
Well, to your earlier question, what was it like in our time deciding, before kids? Mm-hmm. I mean, really, nothing awakened that want for kids in me like the loss that we sustained. And I write about kind of that transformation in the book, that it was just never something I wanted, maybe cognitively, but not emotionally. Mm-hmm. And then when we went through that experience, I never wanted anything more. And I think in that space and that moment of deciding, do we want this badly enough to risk this all over again, really clarified, I think that really is the essence of the choices of the shape of the life that we make. Do we decide that this is a story we want to have a chance to begin, even if we never know where it's going to lead? And we have absolutely no control over where that's going to lead. And I write in the book, I think this is really, that is the constant calculus of the heart. The heart is always asking, like, oh, I really want this, but I would have to risk all of these things, and all of these other things would have to be put on the line. So would it be better to just play it safe and sort of hedgehog and, not make a go of it, and also never see where that story leads? And that's the hard part. And I don't write about this in the book because it happened outside of the book, but it was quite a formative experience for me. While I was editing the book, we went through a second loss. And I had to ask myself, a lot of people close to me were asking, my husband was asking me, my agent was asking me, does this, and they were trying to be really gentle with me. They were trying to delicately ask, does this change anything for you? Does this change anything in your writing? And as I considered it, it actually felt an immense consolation to realize that I wouldn't change. It didn't change anything that I'd written. And I took that to mean that I was being honest with myself, that when we walked through this hard thing the first time, I hadn't told myself any lies or delusions, that everything I had said held up, even though it happened again, and it was even harder. But I took that as consolation that I'd been honest with myself. And I also think, something else that is a big theme to me through the writing and living of the book is that I think that when we become people who make the difficult choice to take risks, we actually really end up liking who we become, because we become people of courage and we become people who stay gutsy even after everything. And that's not easily done, but I think it's one way that we can, I think, make ourselves proud. And that's meaningful. And maybe that's another way of getting at, no love is ever wasted and no hope is ever wasted. And it's very challenging when something happens, especially again and again, and you have those before and after moments of loss and that risk being, being disappointed. It can be so easy to learn the wrong lesson. And I think that wrong lesson is it's better just not even to try.
Were you adverse to risk as a kid?
That's a good question. I don't think particularly so.
I guess I ask because when I think about people being able to step up to that risk and break through, many times it's because of reasons that are much further back than their adulthood, that they were really ingrained as a kid to be risk averse.
Yeah. Something that I did learn and that really interested me in just the researching for this book is that actually studies show that when and where you have secure attachments, so safe relationships where you can mess up and fail and it's, you're still, there's unconditional love. So when and where you have those secure attachments, oh my gosh, I can't say that word. Studies show that people in that security, they are more emboldened to take risks than they would otherwise. And I take that to mean when you do have that base of safety and support that we all want, that we're all looking for, you do feel free to get a little risky out there and go for things that you might not otherwise go for. So that is, I think that's meaningful.
Makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a couple paragraphs that you'd like to read for us?
Sure. Let me find some.
No, I will tell you the one. Go ahead.
This is short, but just speaking to kind of the narratives, the personal narrative, and the larger rhythms of the liturgical year that I was speaking of earlier. So. Life is like this, a great shimmering color wheel of emotions that jostle against each other in surprising, sometimes unsettling ways. Time holds many memories, and anniversaries overlap and overlay the present. Life, death, and resurrection cycle through our days like the turning colors of a kaleidoscope. We weave in and out of bouts of brimming over joy, impossible hope, and fragile fear. Life is absurd, because so much happens and so little makes sense. And it is exquisite, because even as the kaleidoscope turns, look at all that color.
Where did you learn how to write like that?
Lots and lots of reading.
Really? Is there
Yeah.
anybody in your family that was a writer? Or is there,
Lots of readers and writers in the family,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah, yep, yeah. No, that's a huge, I mean, I think every writing session I've ever had has started with a reading session. It's just, I don't know how else you put words together except learning from other people.
I want to take you to page 46, because this is where you describe the loss of your first child. And I must tell you, I felt like I had been kicked in the gut after I read those couple paragraphs. I don't know if any of you know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, how did you decide to write this? And I don't know how you would feel about reading it. It's up to you. But it is, I have never heard anybody describe the loss of a pregnancy in such an honest way.
Thank you. I wrote, what you're describing, I think I'd actually rather not read it. I'll read you something else. But I had a couple designs on this chapter. It's the hardest one. It's chapter 4. I'll talk a little bit about it, but part of the juxtaposition I was interested in exploring in as a writer, I'm always interested in paradox. I'm always interested in juxtaposition. This one was deeply painful one. But as I said, we sustained this loss during Advent, right before Christmas. And everything about the Christmas narrative, which has been historically meaningful to me, just felt like a slap in the face. So I actually found a lot of comfort in, for us, this loss happening on what ended up just happenstance being the winter solstice, which is the longest, darkest night of the year. And I felt very seen by that in a way that I couldn't feel seen by this narrative of birth. And that chapter, it's called Naming the Night, because I think you can't heal from anything that you're not willing to name how hard it's been. So the winter solstice, for me, it helped me name what was truly the darkest night. So I felt that was important for this book, but it also felt very important to me not to keep the reader there, because it's hard. And I didn't write this book to pull anybody into my pain. I wrote it to hopefully bring them with me into the beyond and walk into wholeness and walk towards wholeness. So I didn't want to shortcut naming that night, but I also wanted to confine it. So especially for people who've shared this personal experience, I've been saying liberally, if that's hard for you to read, just skip chapter 4. You just don't read it. And you don't have to. It won't follow you through the rest of the book. And also, I made decisions when I wrote that chapter to, again, I wanted to take care of my reader, and I didn't want it to feel like a wrenching experience for them. So I wrote it, I left a lot out, actually, and I did that because I realized this is for me, this is a detail for me, but this is not helping other people. They don't need that. So I took that out. I will read this other part, which is particular to my experience, but I think also hopefully transcends that. Just speaking of this, the particularity of this grief. So yeah, and some may know, October is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, so a lot of people are having these conversations right now, and this is one way that I've just come to think about it. Pregnancy loss is an invisible grief, yet it is a death in the family. There is no past to speak of, no eulogy to write, no stories you haven't heard before to be told at the wake. Rather, it is the death of the future, death of the story that could have been, should have been. In pregnancy loss, you experience death in your body in a most intimate way, and yet you keep living, and this can be a singular pain. Your body becomes the place where life was wanted, but then the place where death has happened. What was once God breathed is now body emptied. And yet someone still has to defrost the chicken, talk about the weather with your pharmacist, go to meetings that should have been emails and happy hours and other people's baby showers, pretending that the ultimate has not just happened, when of course it has. The loss itself is the first grief, and then the burden of pretense becomes the second. As any good therapist will tell you, there's a clinical name for the experience of our pain going unseen, and it is trauma. And I just think back to that kind of secure attachment and relationship, we really need to be witnessed in the hard things in our lives. And it can be so hard when pregnancy loss is one example, where a lot of people, for very valid reasons, don't want to talk about that with their coworkers and their neighbors. And, no one's ever entitled to know that or obligated to talk about it. But to have some safe places where you can be yourself and be seen, and that pretense can be so difficult.
But then you go on to talk about how sometimes we're not seen in this pain. People think you should get over it. It was, that there is a time element of it. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I have a chapter called Redefining Resilience because it's a little bit of I think it's one of my longest chapters, so you can tell it's a pet peeve. But I realize that I definitely have an issue with the concept of resilience as really just another way to be better at healing and almost kind of trophyifying the overcoming process. And I really don't like that word because I think it suggests to me, you have to get over it, like jump a track hurdle. But I don't think that authentic healing and wholeness can never be as simple as putting as much A to B distance between you and a hard thing that's happened. So, those are very one-dimensional ways to get about healing, but I think resilience is, if I had to redefine it, I think it's much more about learning how to get comfortable with the tension that life holds a full spectrum of joy and sorrow and everything in between. So, for me, it was just the personal experience of trying to sustain some kind of hope for the birth of our daughter after a loss, even though I knew that the worst can happen. And, making space for the future not to be a foregone conclusion, but also, learning to name the night and say, yeah, this was real and this really hurt and I'm not over this. So it's that comfortability with the both and, not living in denial, but not living in despair either. I think that's where our capacity for resilience can actually grow.
And it's also just a question of when people just don't want to give you a break, they want you to be over it so that they don't hurt anymore, almost, right?
People say some really stupid things. And I do think if I'm being on a good day, if I'm trying to be generous, I think people do really mean well. I think they want us, when you love someone, you want them to be okay, you want them to be better, you want them to, you want them to have a good future, but it can easily turn dishonest, and I also really, I'm just listing off all my pet peeves tonight, but I have a really low tolerance for any suggestion, particularly for people who've experienced miscarriages, the suggestion that after rain, you're entitled to a rainbow, because that's just not most people's experience. And that was another way that I wrote the book, or that I tried to write the book, not go anywhere near that suggestion, because I can't, that's not the point. I don't believe that. you never know how the story's going to go. So there's no guarantees, and that's where the risk comes back in.
And how do you think we got to that place? I mean, in society, that we, okay, you get this amount of time, and then your grief is over, and then there's a rainbow at the end. And where did we get this idea that was okay?
I'm sure lots of ways that could be answered, but I do think that as a society, we're pretty fixated on the traditional hero's journey. And there's maybe nothing inherently wrong with that, but again, it does sort of present this simplistic, linear idea that sure, you'll face some setbacks, you'll go through some things, but you'll bounce back. And you'll sort of denouement at the end and get your resolution. And I just, it's rarely that simple, right?
I want to ask you just one question, going back to page 46 in that difficult couple of paragraphs. You say that after it happened, and I don't know if you used the word instinctively, but that you made the sign of the cross. What is your religious path? What has it been over the years, and why was that so instinctive for you?
Yeah, I think it really was an instinct, and I'm very personally persuaded by what the incarnation means to me, which is God becoming human, and not just becoming human, but God entering into the human experience and all its pain. Much has been made of kind of faith and religious expressions that are very big on power, and I think that's when they're at their worst. But that's what I more connect with, is God with us in our pain. And I think the embodiment of, God becoming a human, I think there was something in an impulse that says, like, our bodies matter. I really do believe that. And there was just an instinct there, I think, that was somatic, and my body wanted to respond some way in love, and that's how it came out.
So you talked earlier, and then you wrote about how do you trust after you've been whatever, not trusted. Breaking through that, is there a process, or did it just evolve for you?
The process of kind of finding the courage to, take more risks. And I think certainly the secure attachment, in my experience, I felt that in a divine sense, there's safety here, and love, and in an interpersonal sense with my husband, with family and friends, it was really holding us in a difficult times. I think also learning to really ground myself in the present. So in the context of pregnancy, both of our kids were born after losses. So both of those pregnancies with scares along the way, and it became a big part of my practice to just kind of say, what can I claim? What's true today? Mm-hmm. And mostly, at the least, I could say, today I'm pregnant. I don't know about tomorrow. I don't know about next week. I don't know about the next few months, but today, this is where I'm at. And also, again, kind of in the bringing that into my body, a big practice for me was, how can I kind of stay with my breath? And that sounds very wispy, but it really, and I felt that way too as a first timer going into labor. I was like, really, you're going to tell me to breathe, and that's going to be my lifeline. And but really leaning into the depth of that, and really the diaphragmatic breath, inhale and exhale, is actually biologically one of the greatest psychological supports that we have when the present is terrifying or the future is unknown. But to ground ourselves in the present and stay with our breath and stay with ourselves, stay with what we know to be true and what will support us. And I share some practices of that in the book, but that's another, something else that helped. And then I also think about if I'm allowed to be metaphorical, and I'm a writer, so I'll take that license. But I think our hearts are a muscle, and to me that says that they're made for flexing, they're made for strength, they're made for courage, really. And we build that courage by trying again and risking again, even though we know there's no guarantees. We know the story could end in a place that, it could end like the last time. It could end in heartbreak. It could end in rejection or loss. But when you go through something difficult, when you go through any of those experiences, loss, rejection, heartbreak, you know how hard it is to have zero control, and that loss of control ends up being one of the hardest things. So I'm of the mind that wherever you can take your agency, take it. So if that means I am making a choice to love again, try again, then that's yours. And ultimately that's also, you become a person of courage when you make those choices, and that's for you to decide. So it's I think what clarified for me is we don't have any control over what happens to us, but we have every say over who we become in response to what happens. And that's something, I hope.
It is time for your questions. And
Yes.
this lady is going to take care of that.
Yeah, if you have a question, please raise your hand. I will bring you the microphone because we are live streaming. Fire them away.
Your love risk was conceiving, and your heartache was losing that pregnancy. What other types of love would what you're talking about apply to?
Yeah, I tell the story in the book of a friend whose husband left her after 10 years of marriage, and then, had a very, they were ring shopping, another relationship, and then he inexplicably ended that relationship. And then she, made the decision to open her heart again to someone else, and just the immense courage that takes. So I think that's another context. Even, I think in the context of friendships, after really difficult friendship breakups and rifts in relationship with family, anything that kind of calls upon who we are to engage with another person as they are is the realm of both love but also risk.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to say, I feel really moved almost to tears by this just conversation, and I can't wait to read more of the book. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about, and I haven't read the whole book yet, but I know that it has, as you described, sort of religious overtones, undertones. And the cover of the book has the word spiritual, and I think that that's the word that it feels more acceptable to sort of say in our generation in pop culture, I'm spiritual but not religious. So how does it feel to be kind of openly connecting to religion in your narrative? And what speaks to you about doing that?
Complicated. Very complicated. How much time do you have? I do really like the word spiritual, and I like spiritual practice because I like a practice. I mean, clearly I would make a terrible motivational speaker, but I still want something to do, so a practice is nice. And I do think spiritual, I said this earlier, but it bears repeating. I do think that, you know, I'm making a big argument in the book that healing, or, you know, what personal narrative, whatever narrative you're living, it's really, it's not linear. We really do more live in cycles, and, you know, the natural world shows us that. And I think that kind of the ongoing cycles, natural narrative cycles that we live in of life and death and new life are familiar, and I hope widely accessible, whatever entry points people have from that. But I think it has to be, I think, you know, the choice to love and participate in connection that's bigger than ourselves, it has to be spiritual because it is bigger than ourselves. So I think that's, yeah, there's a lot of mystery to that, but I think that it's worth naming. And, you know, I think I've been happy so far. I've been pleased that the book has been speaking to a wide spectrum of readers, because I don't really want to be boxed in. So thank you.
Other than reading good writing like yours, what advice would you have to writers writing their story that maybe you didn't have for writers before you wrote this book, but you have now that you have written yours and brought it into the world?
Are you a writer?
Yes. And I work with writers.
You work with writers, okay.
I think my experience is a lot of, I knew all this cognitively, and then getting into it, it's like, oh, that's harder than I thought. Oh, who would have thought? But I think getting as much feedback, like feedback is, I love feedback. My worst nightmare of finding a publisher for this book, my worst nightmare was that my manuscript wouldn't really be edited, and that it would just be like, yeah, like change these couple things and we're good to go. That was terrifying to me. So I really value, and it didn't happen, thank goodness. But I really value feedback, and I think I needed a lot of that, especially in the early stages when I was still feeling out, is this a book or is this, you know, just a personal project? So that was key for me, and I think anytime you can get that objective outside perspective, and also people, like maybe not always just your friends, people who will actually tell you if there's something here that other people want to read. And, you know, I'll always draw a line between, it's always worth writing, it's always worth doing that for yourself, but does it need to be public is the other question. So bringing in some trusted people to that was key for me, and I needed more than I even thought I did, so.
What has been your biggest challenge in writing the book, and also the most rewarding thing in writing, like the process itself?
The most challenging thing was a moment early on. I had been working on my proposal for a while, and I was working with an agent, and we were ready to send it out on submission to publishers. So as a publishing professional, there was that moment when I was about to hit send, and I was like, am I really just sending this deeply personal book about my life to all of my industry colleagues? Yes, I am. Okay. And so it's been challenging, but also the support has been huge. So it's too late now. But I think a lot of writers, and it's so normal to have the second guessing. I didn't experience so much second guessing in the writing or should this be a book, my insecurities and second guessing was more in, do I really want to put this in print? And I think, as to be expected. So that was challenging. It's been so rewarding to hear people resonate with it who are perhaps even not the, as we say in publishing, target audience. It's pretty, for face value reasons, it's pretty rooted in the feminine experience. And some of my favorite readers' feedback so far has been from men who are like, I'm buying a copy of this for my wife and my daughters, and just surprising. And I like that. So that's been great.
Has there been any criticism of the type of and depth of sharing that you did?
No, there hasn't. There was some 2-star reviewer who called it flowery. I'll forgive them. But,
Flowery?
Yeah. Not what I was going for. But no. And actually my favorite review so far almost gave me a heart attack when I first read it, but she started with, I can't relate. And she said, I can't relate to any of these specific experiences. I've never, been pregnant. I've never lost a pregnancy. I've never blah, blah, blah. And she said, but this is, one of the most relatable books that I've read recently. So I did my job, at least by one person. So,
Is there another book for you?
Not right now. No. So it's a trope in publishing.
Yeah.
Kind of the book is baby.
Yeah.
I'm in the newborn stage, if we're going to do that, and can't even think about it. Nope.
What haven't we talked about in the book that you would like to leave these folks with? And we have, I'm sorry, we have another question back here. My apologies. You go.
Congratulations, friend. This is an editing question. You are the best in the biz. How did this experience, how's this going to change you? And I don't know how you could get better of an editor than you already are, but how will this change you in the future as a published author now? Do you know? Have you been editing books since this has come out?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think, well, thank you for saying that. And I think keeping it professional, it's hard for us to keep professional because we really do love the books that we work on, and they're also our babies too. And it can be challenging to do that. But also just, and I think that's important, like I'm my author's editor. There's a very deep relationship there, but I'm not the one that you text at midnight. Hopefully you have other people for that. So I with that balance in mind, but I think just really, really tending to the humanity, like we're all people in this process. We're all people in this process, and life happens for all of us. So when people miss their deadlines, when people, are taking a long time to get back to you, or being, God forbid, finicky about their cover design, or everybody has their reasons, everybody has their baggage and histories, and just acknowledging that. I think I'm a big believer, I hope, and practitioner of keeping publishing as human a process as possible. So now that I've experienced it on this side, I hope that it's instilled a lot of empathy for authors in what they're going through. And also writing is such a solitary process. It really is. So I hope that I'll be even better at standing up to that great privilege of being a personal support to them in their process. Down to the details of just calling to check in on release week, how are you doing? And that means so much. So that's my hope.
You talked earlier about this layering of the liturgical year over the different things that happened to you in your life. I want to make sure that we didn't pass over that too much. Is there a way that you can explain that to the folks who haven't read the book yet, and what that meant to you?
Yes. I can probably read it for you better if I can grab it real quick. I think I really resonated with this way of keeping time because it's a story that has everything. So there's joy and there's feasting and there's celebration, but there's also quite literally God crying out why. And it felt to me like this way of keeping time is actually an expression of empathy, love with us. So I'll read just a brief bit on that. From the beginning in Advent through the end of its cycle in ordinary time, the liturgical year tells a story that mirrors this drama of the human experience. The wonder of new life, the unknowing of the in-between, the death of hope, living hell, and the astonishment of new beginnings. Much like our lives, sacred time is studded with the striking polarities of love, loss, and liminality. This is a story that holds ashes and ascension, silent nights and bitter betrayals, bread and wine and burial spices, weddings, and God in human voice crying why. The one thing this story will not do is skim the surface. This story does not skip tracks, nor look away when the scene gets intense. Rather, the range of the liturgical story becomes for us one of its greatest gifts. It's expressing the radical empathy of God with us in every human moment. The I am incarnate in our joy, fear, sorrow, and surprise. God in every gradient of the color wheel that composes a life.
And that is a great way to wrap up. Everybody, please give a warm thank you to our author, and she will be here. I'll pass that over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Something's wrong with this microphone. Thank you so much, Stephanie and Connie. We will be doing a book signing right over